Welcome to the Futurati podcast. Any member of the Futurati is somebody who believes in the power of the future. We know there's a better world ahead, and we indeed have the power to make it so. In our podcast, we talk to the best minds in the world about the most urgent problems facing mankind today, and we hope you learn as much from them as we do. I'm Thomas Fry, a professional futurist and keynote speaker.
And I'm Trent Fowler, a machine learning engineer and author. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati podcast. Tonight, we're joined by Elaine Pofelt, who is an independent journalist and speaker specializing in careers and entrepreneurship. In 2018, she published a well-received book called The $1 Million One-Person Business, Make Great Money, Work the Way You Like, Have the Life You Want. And today she's joining us to discuss her newest book, Tiny Business, Big Money. If you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like the episode and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Elaine, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much. It's so nice to be here.
I believe we had our first interview with you in, May of 2021? So why don't you tell us what you've been up to the past year?
Sure. Well, I just released my next book, Tiny Business, Big Money. The first book I wrote about, which we discussed initially, was the $1 Million One-Person Business, where I looked at solo entrepreneurs getting to seven figures. This book, Tiny Business, Big Money, looks at those with tiny teams. Maybe they hired their first couple of employees, or they have a team of recurring team of contractors who help them keep the trains running on time, and they function more like a traditional business. What I found when I was updating the $1 Million One-Person Business was some of the businesses were transitioning over, and they were struggling a little bit with kind of trading their freedom for the freedoms that come with the team. You know, having to talk to the team about what they wanted, having to sort of run the rodeo, and it was really interesting to see how they were solving for that.
I love it. Yeah, I've got lots and lots of questions about your newest book, which I've been reading over these past couple of days. But I wanted to start somewhere a little bit more personal. And I noted that in the introduction to your book, you say that you would take these daily walks and you would survey some of the destruction that had been visited upon small businesses by the pandemic. And as a journalist, rather, who focuses on businesses and entrepreneurship, I wondered if you would tell us your perspective on the pandemic and what it's meant.
Well, it's definitely hurt a lot of small businesses, but I think it's also led to creative destruction. I think, some businesses closed, not necessarily because they had a bad business model, but because it was a bad business model for an environment where the world was locked down. There was really not that much they could do. Some of them pivoted into other areas like e-commerce, and I saw some brand new types of businesses fill the spaces that were vacated because some other businesses closed. Ultimately, I think it made us all stronger business people because we've realized we have to be much more diversified in everything that we do, and how we accept money, how we serve clients, which clients do we serve, do we do it in person or virtually or hybrid? I think all of those things are good tools to have in our toolkit, but at the same time, I think people are a little tired right now.
Right.
I think a lot of people need a really good vacation, and I hope that they take care of themselves, because I think it also made us aware of the need for wellness and good mental health and just being around fun people that we love and enjoy. And I hope people do take the time to do those things, because that reboots us as entrepreneurs.
Yeah, this has really been a time of introspection where people have to look at themselves. Is this really where I wanted to be in life? And kind of reevaluate what the approach vector they're going to use for moving forward. I see this as really a kind of a time of great loss, but great opportunity at the same time. So I kind of echo the sentiments that you've just been stating.
I think it's almost as if we've all done 100 push-ups, right? I don't know that I could do 100 push-ups, but you do your maximum, right? Your arms are shaking, and there's a point you reach where you just cannot do anymore.
Right.
But that's where the growth is, right? Like, we've been pushed to that point. but when you're that tired, you can't talk yourself into things
Right.
that you don't want to do. You have to rest and maybe think about things a little bit, or change your workout. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Things
so-
like Great Resignation, right? People in jobs that were like doing the 100 push-ups and they can't do it anymore, but maybe they'll become entrepreneurs. I'm sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, some of the most valuable skills I see right during this period are your ability to be resilient and flexible, and to be resourceful and find opportunity where nobody else is looking. And so my sense is that that's probably what you've written about in some of your book.
Yeah, that has been the focus. The people are doing all kinds of interesting things. One woman, Laura Belgray, is a copywriter, and she was getting paid $1,450 an hour. We would all love that, right? But It was a
Wow.
lot of pressure. And so she started she actually had created them, but she wasn't marketing them much, these PDF courses on things like how to create a great About Us page or how to create a great professional bio. And she went to this business coach who said, why don't you market those more? And it was really that helped her to get to $1 million. And she also added on a team, like a VA team, to help her deal with more of the administrative aspects of the business and some strategy too. She got a very good VA. Another woman, Raquel Graham, is an inventor, and she made a scarf alternative called Nex, Nekz. They're like kind of like a wrap type thing rather than a scarf, and she sells them on HSN. She does the business part of the year, and she's a mother, and she keeps busy doing other things the rest of the year. Very innovative. Steve Sudell is a physical therapist, and he came up with something called the neck hammock. He found people needed an inexpensive neck traction device, and so he created a device that hangs on a doorknob, and you can rest your neck. And it was because he actually had a neck injury, and he raised the money on Indiegogo. They're all around the map, in terms of different things that people are doing. But they use certain methods that they have in common that have helped them to scale up and still keep the freedoms of more of a 4-hour work week type lifestyle. Although I wouldn't say any of them is working just 4 hours.
Yeah, so why don't we stick with that then? What are some of the techniques that people are able to use to find good opportunities, to validate them, to scale them, and to maintain their sanity as they do so?
Well, what I found was there was a continuum. So the first type of business would be a fully automated business. And one example, Rajesh Srivastava was a guy who worked in big tech for many years. And he started Price Series, which is a business that makes specialized investment reports. It's by subscription. He used contractors to get it all set up, but then he didn't need them anymore. So he automated the sale of these reports. There's a report he puts on the homepage that is automatically generated, and it's considered original content by Google. So it pulls him up in the Google ranking. Then usually what happens is they'll go from automation to automation plus contractors. This is kind of the low-hanging fruit in terms of expanding, because if you fire an app, nobody's feelings get hurt. And a contractor isn't really fired. You bring them on for a project, and then if you don't need them anymore, no harm, no foul. Then usually what happens is they're using certain contractors a lot, and that maybe the person charges $100 an hour, and they realize, I use them 30 hours this week. That's not very cost effective. So maybe you can work something out where they get the regular salary and you get a discount on what they would charge if you did it as a one-off project. Maybe you give them some benefits. And then usually what happens is they get rid of the contractors at a certain point and just go to straight employees as the business grows, because it's a little easier if you have the people there when you need them. And then the final way I saw was with partnerships. And one example, one inventor created Lawson Hammock, and it was these outdoor sleeping hammocks. He was an outdoorsman. He worked in real estate, and he was having these local seamstresses actually physically sew the hammocks. And that got cumbersome when they started scaling up the ads and things and getting more orders. So he found this local team of business people who knew how to do the back end of this type of a business, and they got equity. And then he actually went back into real estate because it's been booming, and he still owns part of the business, but so do they, and they handle all of, how do they actually manufacture it now overseas. But I thought that was kind of interesting, just what the progression is. One thing is they don't do meetings that much in some of the businesses. Brian Dean runs a business called Backlinko. It teaches people about SEO, and he just sold it to SEMrush. But he runs a whole business on Notion, a tech app, and never has meetings. He hates meetings. And that's what I loved about these stories is you don't have to do it the way you learned at your old job that you hated. You could do it a totally different way.
So how do you go about finding these people? Do they come to you? I mean, if he doesn't like meetings, I mean, how did you meet with him?
Well, with him, I don't even remember how I met him. I've known him for years. A lot of times they read the original series that I wrote on Forbes of these $1 million one-person businesses and write to me, and or their publicist does, and they say, hey, I'm one of those businesses. Usually I love people. I get to talking to them. They become friends, over time. So I find out a lot about them. And then, I follow their different adventures as they grow these businesses. Some of them have ended up selling the business, like Steve Sudell, the guy with the neck hammock. In the time that I've known him, I actually met him probably like 2017, and he came and spoke. I just was on a program with the Chicago Inventors Association. He came out there and he spoke about that. Then he continued building the business. Then he found a buyer, but he's kind of a serial entrepreneur. He keeps his physical therapy practice going, and he looks at it as a laboratory. But I find just, a lot of them seem to know each other through entrepreneurial circles, and there's a lot of word of mouth. I'm on social media. I've really specialized in this area, but I do look for businesses that have lessons to teach other people, that aren't just, a routine e-commerce business, but one that has some good business practices. So if I write it, it's instructive for people besides being just entertaining. Like, here's another person that got to $1 million,
Right.
Because that doesn't tell people that much. And they have to be willing to share that. Just to give you an example of some of the things that they shared with me, one woman named Tiffany Williams, she was an Amazon seller. And then she started Rich Girl Collective, where she teaches other women how to start businesses. And she told me her favorite apps and tools. And actually, it was funny, when I verified her revenue, I saw the first 1099 form with over $1 million that I've ever seen.
Wow.
I was like, oh my God, because I don't want to say where she earns, like what platform she uses just in case of hackers, but it was pretty amazing to see that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Adobe Stock, Canva for design, ClickFunnels for online marketing, ConvertKit, which is an email marketing platform that helps creative professionals build relationships with their fans, Podia for courses, and Text 180. I had not heard of that one. It's a marketing service using text messaging.
Right.
And, that's the kind of thing I really like to find out, because, why does she do so well? And there are a zillion other people with courses. I mean, she's very engaged with her following. There's a lot of things. So part of it is in the story, right? Is like, you learn a little bit about, how do they have conversations with their fans? What she actually started out doing initially, she likes dogs,
Mm-hmm.
and her pet is a Yorkie named Prada. And she created a little community on Facebook for people that love Yorkies. And then she said, well, what if I introduced a Yorkie t-shirt? And she's not an artist, so she hired somebody to make this cute little Yorkie t-shirt. And guess where she rolled it out? In the community. And that led to her understanding how to sell products. But there was engagement around it because people had this love of dogs, and they knew she really loved Yorkies. So that's the kind of thing that I like to learn about. It's not just putting it up on Teespring. She used Teespring because you didn't have to order inventory. They take the order, and then they take their cut out of it and then pay you. So it's a good method of getting into business if you have no startup capital, or very little. You'd probably have to hire the artist, unless you're an artist. That really interests me. As a Virgo, I'm very detail oriented. So,
Well, yeah, let's stick with that then. Quite a lot of the meat of the book was dealing with the mental shifts that a person has to undergo in order to be successful in a line of work like this. So kind of continuing with the theme of wondering why it is that some people like Tiffany were successful when others aren't. What are some of the lessons you've drawn out for other people who think they might want to try to attempt this?
Well, the number one thing that they all do is pretty simple in words, but not that easy in practice. They actually show up for the business. I didn't really say that so much in the book, but people have been asking me that question, and it's kind of like if you've done martial arts or yoga, something that's more of a practice. There's a mystery to it. You keep going, and I know in yoga there was this posture called the crow, where your hands are down and you're perched with your knees on your elbows, and you feel like you're going to fall flat on your face, which I did every time I tried it for a long time. And I thought, this is going to be one that I can never learn. It's just beyond me. And then one day I came after like 3 years of doing yoga 3 times a week, and I could do the crow. I just could do it. And I don't know why that day I learned how to do it, but there's something about showing up that allows your brain to work on it, and then things come together for you. And I think it is the consistency of effort. That doesn't sound like, I got to 1 million in 1 year, but really most of them didn't. They worked on it kind of slow and steady, but they were passionate about it. They found something that they liked to think about. Some of them really, like me with the census things, they can go to a very geeky level with it, but you have to like it. You have to like the conversation in the industry. And I'll get into this more later, like which industry is right for people. There were other things, though. They're ready and willing to define their own future. They let go of all the training that everybody has, that the only acceptable way to make a living is in a traditional job. And that's hard for us to do, because from elementary school on, we're programmed to be employees. They look at risk through a different lens. I think people traditionally will think of entrepreneurs as being these big risk takers, and it being kind of dangerous to start a business. One entrepreneur, Anthony Coombs, started a business called Splendies, and it's in that box company model, kind of like Birchbox, where you get a little gift every month for like $12. Yeah. I think his is $15. And what he sells is plus size women's underwear. And he targets markets like Alaska, where people would have to drive like an hour and a half to go get a pair of underwear. So it's done really well. It's like a $15 to $18 million business. And when he was a kid, his mom worked for the state of Florida. And when the governor changed, her supposedly secure job dried up, and she became unemployed, and it put the family into devastation. And so he said he would never work for someone again. So he went to University of Pennsylvania. He did a series of businesses, but his thinking is, what is a greater risk, to put my future in the hands of a company owned by someone else or myself? I'd say working for someone else is a much greater risk. And I thought that was kind of interesting. They're willing to learn as they go along. One entrepreneur, Elizabeth Davis, started Shidavi, and it's basically a shampoo brand for women who like to grow their hair long. A lot of women, like, their hair breaks because they use ponytails and things. So she cooked this up in her kitchen, and she experimented with it. She got all her friends and family to try it. Meanwhile, she built this Instagram page where all she did was talk about growing your hair long. And when she finally released the shampoos, then she had this ready-made audience, and she sold about 1,000 bottles in a weekend. And that was her proof of concept. You have to be willing to create the financial base you need. This is one thing where I think people are like, I'm going to quit my job. I hate my boss. I'm quitting today. I'm starting a business. And I don't think that's a good method for most people, because then they can't pay the rent.
Right.
Usually they do it as side hustles, and they start building proof of concept. And then when there's money flowing in, they make it happen, or they make arrangements in their personal life. Like Brian Abrams, he started a specialized placement industry, placement business, where he places tech project managers and his wife worked, so she paid the bills. Basically, he did consulting, but he spent a lot of his time on the business. So they had it all taken care of because they had, I think, 2 kids at the time, now 3. So you have to be able to give yourself some financial runway, unless you have a rich uncle or something like that. But most people don't. And these are real people with real jobs, real savings. They're not starting with more than anybody else would have. And then I said, keep showing up, because people had to pivot a lot in this business. One business is called Vivian Liu, and the founder, Abby Walker, she was a lady who worked in marketing, and she loved wearing high heels. And she had a blog about high heels. And she ordered these insoles from these MIT scientists who created them to make high heels comfortable, which I don't know.
Solving the great problems of our time. Yeah.
That's like kind of like, creating a colony on Mars. But they needed somebody to help them market it. They didn't really understand marketing. They just knew how to make the soles. And she helped them do that. And she built it to a $3 million business. Then the pandemic hit. Guess what? Nobody was wearing high heels because we were all walking around in socks in our houses. So she created insoles for athletic shoes. And she kind of got through the pandemic with that. So she showed up at a point where a lot of people would have just closed down because no one was wearing high heels. But she kind of had the long game in mind. So I'll stop there. Those were some of the mindsets.
It sounds like the successful millionaire entrepreneurs are the ones that are willing to learn constantly, pivot when it's required, swing for the fences, and fall on their face until they figure it out.
Definitely. And they're paying attention to clues from the marketplace. Anthony Coombs, the guy with the Splendies box company, he noticed that 2 organic Facebook communities sprung up that he had nothing to do with, where sometimes women would get the gift box and they didn't like what was in it, so they would trade it before anybody used anything. And that was a very thriving community. So he thought, well, people really like this. And there was another box company where the women were getting together and they would have unboxing parties. And it was a way to meet new people in their community that they didn't even know. They'd like sort of meet online and they all get together with their boxes. And they thought that was pretty cool, right? If things like that are happening, then there's a level of engagement that kind of the magic goes just beyond you, the founder, to the community that buys this product.
That's pretty remarkable that you just are on Facebook, you notice that these people are having this problem and you think, I bet I could build a business around that. And then you do, and it's worth $18 million.
It's pretty amazing. Well, he listened because he had a lot of different businesses. He had one where he was selling cars online. He created an app that would help people meet other people who wanted to meet people in close proximity, but it was a little ahead of its time. His first business was selling mosaic tiles online. And his cousin told him that she thought there was a gap in the marketplace for this, but he listened.
Right.
And it wasn't a product that he bought. So he did his own homework on it. And the way he got inventory was he'd go to malls and buy like the 99-cent panties and put them in the box and see what people like. But it was a very low-cost experiment. And that's the other thing with these folks. They're big risk mitigators.
I'm just imagining him in Walmart buying like giant armfuls
of women's underwear.
I imagine that at a certain point an awkward conversation had to take place.
I can imagine. Yeah, but he was bold and he went and did it. And these women are really thankful because they live in places where it's hard. It's a routine item, but it's, if you can't get it easily, are you going to drive an hour and a half to go get it? And he found a ready market. And I think people really appreciate it when you're tapping a need that is actually really hard to fill.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I was listening to an interview recently with Michael Dell, and he was being asked the question of how did you know that you should drop out of college rather than finish college and start your business? And he said, well, I knew it was time to drop out of college because I was making $80,000 a month from my dorm room. And so that was a pretty good indicator. Now, I'm guessing a lot of people ask you for advice on starting businesses. Do you get the question about should I drop out of college to go full time doing this?
I haven't had anyone ask me that, but I think it's in the people's minds.
Yeah.
And I think there's only an individual answer to that question, right? Like Michael Dell had his answer, but there might be another person making $80,000 a month who might say, you know what, this is the only time in life I'm really going to be able to immerse myself in world literature. So I'll keep running the business a little longer. You really have to know yourself and what you want out of life. And things like college aren't only for getting a credential to get a job.
Right.
For some people it is. For some people it's a big waste of time. Like for a lot of the entrepreneurs, they're impatient. They have a bias to action. Yep. And they don't want to be sitting in a classroom. These folks are lifelong learners, though. They're learning from, every possible source. They're on YouTube, they're at conferences, they're on Zoom calls, they're on WhatsApp chats it's amazing how the osmosis of information takes place. And that's part of it being, to get to seven figures, you can't really be that slow. If there's a trend in your industry, you have to know what it is and either decide you're going to go with it or you're going to have an answer to it in the conversation in the industry that's different. You have to differentiate yourself. Education is really important, but it doesn't always take place in school. So a lot of these people,
certainly not.
They're listeners too. I think they listen to things like with audio much more so than like sitting down and reading a book, just based on my totally subjective experience.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like your phrase, bias to action. It seems like there's certain characteristics in people that are willing to take the initiative and start their own business. Do you have those that you can just rattle off the top of your head? What kind of characteristics those are?
Well, I would say they have a certain mojo, right? Like that's a willingness to get in the ring. I like Taekwondo, and there's a point where you have to be a little brave and make yourself vulnerable, and maybe you will lose, but they're willing to do that. They're willing to publicly fail because they know most people won't ever try things, and what difference does it make what other people think of them? So you have to have a little bit of bravery, but sometimes the arenas are pretty small, and there are ways to do it in a way where if you do fail, the risk of failure will not derail you from being an entrepreneur. Just a quick example, Anna Gavia, who started a bikini company called Pink Colada, was a medical school student, and she liked to sketch. She grew up in a beach community. She never found like a sporty bikini that she really liked. So she found a factory on Alibaba that was willing to make a sample, put it up on Instagram for pre-order, drove traffic to it with Facebook ads, and she got 1,000 orders. So she knew people liked these bikinis. She didn't spend a single penny ever on a bikini that no one ordered. And she put the order through to the factory. They were willing to do small runs. She did leave medical school, by the way. But the business grew really fast. And now she's got 5 employees. She's over 1 million, and she's expanding into the United States. And maybe she'll get back to medicine. I don't know. But she was good at the bikini thing. And so she, they have that willingness to test their ideas. And you could put up your bikini and maybe everybody would hate it. Being willing to get your feelings hurt and put your ego aside and just say, well, maybe the market wasn't ready for it, or maybe there's something I can learn from this and improve upon it. Maybe I could poll people and find out why they didn't like this bikini, or maybe there's too much competition. They have that willingness. There was one entrepreneur, Jason Vandergrant. He's an Ontario-based entrepreneur. He loves designer sunglasses. And he had been working in engineering design. He created this app. He spent $29,000 on it.
Wow.
Put it in the market. And then he realized something critical, which was there was a lot more competition among these apps than he knew about.
Right.
And he shut it down after spending $29,000 that he had earned over years and years in corporate. But he was willing to do that because it wasn't worth it to run it. But then he started his real business, the Breakaway business, which does CAD design, and he has 40 contractors around the world. He loves travel too. And they do outsourced engineering design. It's a service business, but he has it structured so that it's profitable, and it allows him to have the lifestyle he wants. So they're willing, if things don't work out, they're not married to that idea. Like, okay, I got to go down with the ship. I spent $29,000 on it. But he didn't spend $29 million on it either. If, like, say, he raised venture capital, they find a way to do it small. So those are some of the things. I think that they also know themselves, and they figure out how best to market the business. So if they're an introvert, maybe they're doing a lot of online marketing. If they're an extrovert, maybe they're out at trade shows, but they accept who they are. That's the beauty of a very small business, is you don't have to do things the way everybody else does. Brian Dean, the founder of Backlinko, he just sold it to SEMrush. It's a business involved with search engine optimization. He hates meetings. He doesn't have meetings. He's got a team of contractors, and he manages everybody on Notion, this tech platform. And I like that he knew himself, and he knew just he didn't want to do the meetings. And I think that's common. They know what they like and how they want to do it.
I really like that. And I suspect that a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to test an idea. As you were describing the medical student who had the idea for the bikini line, and she put some sketches out there, drove traffic to it with Facebook advertisements. And from the way you described it, it sounds like she didn't actually make them until she had orders, right?
No, she only made that prototype. She didn't have enough money to make a dress. She wanted to make a dress, but she only had $200. So she instead did the bikini, and that was her only investment other than the ads, which she said were like $6.
That's
so
amazing.
She really minimized her risk and maximized her startup capital. Then she funded it through cash flow.
Yeah,
as far as I know, she's never taken in outside money.
So she didn't even have enough money to make a plus size bikini then, huh?
No, it was size medium. That was carefully thought out, like medium, so she would get the most women. I just thought that was brilliant, though. Jason Vandergrint, the CAD design guy, he has a lot of other ideas too, and he said to rein himself in, because you know how entrepreneurs are; they have like 8 other ideas. He gets a GoDaddy website for 30 days, and he'll put up a design of what he wants to sell. And then he does the same thing. He uses online advertising to drive traffic there, and he sees if anyone's interested. And if they're not, he closes it down, and he doesn't spend a single penny more than just that GoDaddy site and his time creating whatever he puts up on there.
I really like that. We covered some of this ground in the first interview, but I wonder if you would briefly describe some of the trends that are driving this phenomenon, this emergence of very small businesses that are very profitable and that people manage to run in a reasonable amount of time. What is it that has made that possible?
It's leverage. I think people have learned to leverage their skills, talents, resources beyond what one person normally could do. And a lot of it has to do with digital. If you take out a Facebook ad and it's working, you can put more money behind that ad and get even more customers. It's pretty easy compared to the old days of how people had to sell things. So there's that. Plus, all the tech tools are so inexpensive compared to what they used to be. Nobody needs to own a server anymore, pretty much, other than maybe big companies. It's easier to get funding. There's a lot more access to capital outside of venture capital through crowdfunding. There's a number of crowdfunded businesses in there. There's more grant funding, too, which was kind of interesting. There was one business called Killer Snails where an entrepreneur partnered with a scientist and an academic, and they created this educational game aimed at middle school girls who tend to like biology, according to the one who was a teacher, the academic. And they got grant funding for that through the government, actually. And I think that's making it much more accessible for people that maybe weren't in certain networks, didn't go to the right school, quote unquote, and didn't know the right people. Just, they have so many more avenues if they can be good at selling their idea to other people and getting them excited about it. Plus, they can get proof of concept. That's the other thing is it's easy to go to an investor or a bank or someone else who has the money that you need and show that you sold this amount now because you have data that we didn't used to have all this data.
Right.
is another factor, which is that people are open to entrepreneurship. I mean, we saw in the pandemic, along with the Great Resignation, but I don't think it was only caused by the Great Resignation. A lot of people they didn't have to commute. So they were starting little side businesses, and they were finding out they are really good at it. A lot of people never had an opportunity because they had no time. Chris Mead, in the opening chapter, he and his brother and a friend of theirs started CrossNet. It's a business that is kind of a combo of volleyball and Foursquare. So people would play in each quadrant. And he started it by working on his laptop on the subway, commuting from Brooklyn to Manhattan. But now you don't have to do that, right? You're in your house, your job is over, you close the Zoom call down, and now maybe go for a walk or, have dinner with your family. And it's easy to discreetly jump on and work on your business without having to open up a laptop on a grimy subway.
Right.
And I think that's empowered people because no one ever told them they were good at this. And now no one has to. They're selling things. That's the proof that you're good at a business, is you're selling things.
Yeah, the market has told them that.
Yeah. Do you cover any startups in the crypto space?
Here and there. There was one that I wrote about, Sean Kelly, who is in the book. His first business was called Jersey Champs and has nothing to do with crypto. He sells like sports style jerseys, but with the images of rappers. He realized that the sports jersey world was too competitive, and he liked rap. And then he went on to sell masks in the pandemic. He's a serial entrepreneur. He partnered with an older entrepreneur, and that was an employer business. It had like 3 employees. Then he started Chibi Dinos, and it's like an NFT business where they created these cute little dinosaur NFTs, and they sold them. And it made several $1 million in like 8 days, but they have to create a little community around it, or else it won't have value. I'm not an expert on that type of thing, but I spoke to him quite a bit about it. I wrote about it for Forbes, and I think this is really interesting because I think that's the way we're going to go, is with these different currencies. There's so many restrictions with banks and traditional currency, and entrepreneurs are so independent. I look at myself as kind of middle of the road on things. I'm a mother with 4 kids. I live in suburbia, and I'm interested in crypto, right? So if I'm interested in it, I feel like that means like, the average person probably is. And when people start believing in these things and finding them interesting, that's where I think we're going to see an explosion of creativity, because you need some critical mass involved in it.
Yeah, I felt like Bitcoin had arrived when I told my grandmother, who's in her 80s, that I was working at a crypto company. And she goes, "Oh, is that Bitcoins? Is that what that is?" And I was like, "Yes, grandmother, it's Bitcoins. Thank you." And I figured if she's heard about it, then it has to have achieved saturation in the culture more broadly, or else it just wouldn't have gotten to her, right?
My 11-year-old son is like investing in Dogecoin, and I was cracking up. But I figure, he's the next generation, right?
Yeah.
So if he's doing it, then that's going to be normal for him.
He'll be crypto native.
And also wealth managers. In my ghostwriting practice, I work with a few wealth managers, and even the most conservative ones are starting to look at the alternative currencies. So I think it's only a matter of time. I read an article. It was a woman who's on OnlyFans.
Right.
She's like a mother of 3, and it looks like pinups. I haven't never gone on the site, but she found that banks wouldn't let her accept the money from the customers.
Yes.
So they were having to kind of bank jump, like they keep having to move their account, and sometimes the bank would take the money. So then she became a self-educated expert on crypto. And I thought that was like, what a crazy story. But she was training other women that were on OnlyFans to do that. And now they're all experts in crypto. And I thought, innovation, right? But banks are very useful in certain areas. And maybe in certain areas, we need other types of currency.
I wanted to follow up on something you said about the NFT business. You have to create communities around it. And that reminded me of something you said earlier about, I forget her name, the founder of Rich Girl Collective, who put up Facebook pages about corgis and built a community around that. And I know that the story is very important in entrepreneurship. Telling a story to your clients, how you interact with them, is sort of the narrative that builds around your business. I don't know if it's something you've thought a lot about. I don't recall reading about it in the book, but do you have any thoughts on how entrepreneurs do that, how they craft a narrative around their business, the ways to do it correctly, and how that impacts the ultimate success of the enterprise?
I think for some people it just comes naturally. Like I'm a writer, so the story is always the most interesting thing to me. But most people don't know what their own best story is. I think a lot of times if they're at a party, a good way to figure out what your story really is if people ask you what you do, what is the story you tell them? Because you don't want to be boring at a party.
Right.
If you go to parties. No, if you don't go to parties because you're an extreme introvert, then you have to think about what you talk about online with people. But when you're communicating just on a very human level with other people, what do you tell them? The seeds are there. I think there's kind of an art to this, right? Because it's a business and it's almost like small talk. You don't want to go so personal that you're sharing your therapy session with customers, right? Unless it's a kind of business that you specialize in trauma recovery or something like that. But if you're selling a product, maybe it's like a pain point that you solve for yourself. That's a common route. Like you had this issue or you kept hearing about it from someone like Anthony Coombs. He said his cousin said that it was hard to get the plus size women's underwear. So that's the story really, is him listening to his cousin, discovering there was this huge untapped need, and then all his experiments with building up the business. There's a lot of highs and lows to entrepreneurship too. So I remember at one point he got so many orders, he wound up having to get people off of Craigslist to help him pack, and that's kind of a fun story. Yeah, because you never know. Like sometimes maybe an influencer will mention something and then all of a sudden, or like the Oprah effect, then you're inundated and it can be like the kiss of death, right? If you don't fill all fill all the orders, then, people will be unhappy. They'll all go on social media and complain. So you have to figure it out. But he said he likes those kind of problems. Like he likes to solve those challenges. That's like the entrepreneur in him.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great problem to have.
Yeah, we'd come up with a term called the empire of one. And that refers to a one-person enterprise. And the reason we started talking about this a while back is because there are so many apps and so many tools that we can use right now that enable us to just take on many of the things that we'd normally hire somebody else to do, and we could do it all ourselves. How many of the startups that you interview are actually doing just a one-person business?
Well, in this book, 28% are non-employer businesses, but a lot of them are using contractors. In the other book, there were some that were pure one person, like really nobody else. But almost no business really is nobody else, because almost every business has an accountant, right?
Yeah, right.
And almost many of them have a bookkeeper. So you can never really say any business has nobody else on the team.
Well, right.
Unless they do it like they're literally, the ultimate do-it-yourselfer.
Yeah.
But it's too hard, to keep pace with everything. So in this book, it was about 70% where they had somebody on payroll.
Okay.
At least one person. I could tell you exactly because I did a little survey of the people in the book. And actually, it was kind of interesting, some of the stuff I found out. Let's see. All of them use contractors in their business. 90% use automation. So that addresses some of your question. Took them an average of almost 4 years to get to 1 million in annual revenue. And the 4-year mark was also where they tended to hire the first employee. Why? I don't know. That is an area for future study. And I really invite people to share with me why that is, because I would like to do a bigger study. This is a sample size of about 50. I asked a market research firm, usually you need about 200 to do a real study. But I think, at some point I'd love to get some funding for that and understand why that mark is so critical. Some other interesting things about them. 88% exercise in some way, and yoga is the most popular, followed by gym workouts and strength training. Many of them, 64%, have a mind, body, and spiritual practice. Meditation was a big one, 34% meditate.
Wow.
And then they get outside help. 37% have a business coach. 45% belong to an entrepreneurship group. I should have surveyed them on how many listen to podcasts, because I think podcasts are really critical glue in the entrepreneurial community. A lot of ideas get spread around that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's because there's no book that can be as current as a podcast, right? Like, we're talking right now about things that are happening in real time. If I wrote a textbook, it would be dated. Even, the book, literally, I was still fact checking it 3 months ago, but I'm sure, like, Brian Dean sold his business since I fact checked with him a few months ago. So it changes so fast.
So this is now the state of the art for this area of study, is this podcast right now.
Yeah,
and there's an interactive component too. Like, people can comment on when you put it out there on the web. If they have a question, like, say I said something and they had a question, you could put them in touch with me. I mean, there's just like I like it because it's everyday people just informing each other of things that are working. And I find they're very generous in sharing information, because they don't, especially people that don't want to scale up, they're not viciously competitive. They have their little thing and they want to keep it growing, but they know there's room for other people to fill some of those orders too. And they seem to be very helpful to each other.
Yeah, I wrote a paper a couple of years back on the concept of podcast college, that listening to podcasts is the equivalent, rather than listening to some professor droning away in the front of a classroom, listening to two experts having a conversation is much more interesting. It's much more likely to stick in your head rather than just this one-way flow of information. And so I think sometime in the future somebody's going to pick up on that and move forward with that idea of credentialing podcasts, which I think has tremendous value.
Oh, I love that. I'd love to see the paper too. That's really interesting.
All right, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, that's something that's come up a number of times on the podcast. We talked to Reuben Harris about that, what might be involved, like an audio first or audio only learning platform, and how you might structure that and what some of the hurdles would be. Be a great idea for you're not going to build that with one person for sure, but it's definitely a business enterprise that I think has a lot of potential.
That's why I like usually when I've done events around the books, I'll do a panel discussion with people, where it's kind of like I try to pick a variety of different types of industries, people of different ages, different backgrounds, and put them in a room, because there's sort of a chemistry between people that takes place, where you get different information just because they're in conversation with each other than if I was alone with them one-on-one, or if they did a keynote. And I think you're definitely onto something with that. It's like, why do we work harder if I, go to my hot yoga class in person,
right,
versus I do it on Zoom when I'm like, I go make myself a cup of coffee in the middle of it, even though it's the same class, the same teacher, the same people in the room on the other side of the Zoom. Why? It's just that unknown factor when people get together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was actually going to bring this up after we stopped recording, but you ought to look into Inter-Intellect salons. Have you looked into this at all?
I don't know about them.
Well,
how do you Inter-Intellect?
Yeah, inter is INTER, and then intellect is just the word intellect. So it's like between intellects, but it's essentially a platform for having conversations over the internet. And I mean, it doesn't sound all that revolutionary, but it's really caught on. And people do these on, like French love poems, or Tyler Cowen has done them on the state of the economy and how automation is going to impact employment. I mean, a whole range of different subjects and groups from 3 or 4 people up to like 100. And I as I was reading your book and preparing for this interview, I thought this would make a really good one. Like you talking about these small businesses, and the founder, Anna Gatt, she doesn't run the business entirely on her own, but she does most of it on her own, and she has kind of like people who help her. But it also would be, I think, an interesting business for you to look at. It's a very uniquely modern phenomenon, very uniquely internet-based phenomenon, but it fulfills a deeply felt need to connect with other people and to converse about ideas. And I think just overall, your ideas would be very well suited to that platform, and I think you do really well with it.
Oh, I would love to connect with her. It sounds like a great idea, because I think anything, like even if you're writing books, there's a conversation between books on a topic or between papers,
Right.
between academic papers. You don't want to just repeat the same thing everyone else did. It's how do you move the conversation forward? And
Right.
there is just something, I think there's like friendly competition when people get together. There's a spirit of wanting to create some value and not just keep saying what everybody else is saying. And, just the fun of interacting. So I could see where that would really work. And I just love talking to these people in the book and other entrepreneurs, because there's so many little things that people say that they don't think mean something that really do, that are the critical pin in that whole little machine. And I think we don't see that in ourselves. It's much easier for someone else to see it in you, or what their genius is. They think they're genius. They usually don't think they're geniuses, but I could see it because I interview so many people, and there's a pattern matching thing that happens too with people, where they have their database of ideas and people, and they see something different and they understand how unique and original it is.
So I wanted to tap your storytelling skills and ask you what the most surprising or unusual micro business is that you've profiled so far.
Oh, wow. That's a really good question.
What's one that just made you say, I cannot believe somebody made a $1 million business out of that?
Oh, it's funny. All of them made sense to me. Maybe that's why they're at 1 million, right? Like there really wasn't one no one's ever asked me that question, but I don't think there really was. I mean, sometimes some of them have names where you think it would be hard to get them into stores. I'll give you an example. I'm not surprised that she did really well with it. Wendy Colson started a business called Booby Bars. It's a bar for lactating mothers. And she got it into Walmart. And I thought, Walmart is so conservative. Like, who would think Walmart would carry booby bars? But they did, and they loved it. And that was what propelled her to the next level. She's a nurse. So sometimes it will be things like that. Like you think the branding isn't going to, like, I think
it's a bar they eat, because when you said a bar for lactating women, I was like, okay, so are they all sitting around?
No. What are they drinking? Like,
I was like, I couldn't imagine. Yeah, I couldn't imagine there'd be just a huge market for that, honestly. But what do I know?
It's like a power bar, but it has certain herbs and things in it to help them because they're feeding another human being. And so it will be sometimes things like that surprise me. I actually never tried the bars, but branding is kind of interesting. Sometimes the niches are very small.
So one that I ran into is I talked to a lady and I says, what do you do for a living? And she said, well, my husband and I, we have a full-time business selling used license plates. And,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and that I thought was so outrageous. And come to find out that they were auctioning off license plates on eBay. There's a known community of license plate collectors, a little over 3,000 of them. And so they had turned it into a full-time operation. They had figured out how to accumulate large stocks of used license plates, and certain ones that have words on the license plates, or if they were from a car that was owned by a famous person or something like that, are worth a lot more money. But they know how to figure out where the value is, and something that everybody else would just throw away.
That is really interesting. I guess there's collectors of every type of thing imaginable. One thing I did in the book was I looked at the average revenue for and subtracted average payroll for every industrial code in America to look at the hidden riches and niches, areas that people might have overlooked, and that was really fascinating. For the up to 4 employees, I grouped it according to the number of employees, because that speaks to startup capital. If you don't have much startup capital, you would need to keep it under 4 employees, because you can't make payroll if it's 10 employees. As it grows, maybe you can, but not in the beginning. Then 5 to 9 employees and 10 to 19. So the top one for the up to 4 employees was casinos, which is really interesting. I'm not going to recommend everybody start their own little Las Vegas, but apparently there are some people maybe in Las Vegas doing little gas station casinos or things like that. Second one was creamery butter. It's heavily automated.
Wow.
Ethyl alcohol was number 3. That's ethanol, I guess. And then general medical and surgical hospitals. You know how sometimes, like, if you have to get a test done at doctors and they send you to some little mini hospital, they make a lot of money. Now, payroll isn't the only cost in the businesses. So I caution people to think about, okay, if it's manufacturing, maybe there's energy costs, besides the personnel, maybe you have real estate costs. So you have to look up what the average profits are for this industry. Don't just think that what I have there as that number is the final amount you have left over. The NYU Stern School of Business publishes up-to-date information on the average profit for different industrial codes. So I encourage people to look at that. Also look at market research. Sometimes you can go on Biz Buy Sell or other brokerage sites where people are selling businesses and get a pretty good sense. Sometimes they put up a lot of information about, what is required to run this business. And you'll realize, like, okay, you really need like 25 people for this, or you need a 60,000 square foot building. Just by looking at the listings, you'll get an intuitive sense of what's really entailed. But this is a place to get people started. As you went up, petroleum wholesalers were number 1 for 5 to 9 employees. And I assume that those are probably some sort of financial trader, as opposed to somebody who has like a big tank of petroleum on their property. Second one was bank holding companies. I think in that category, you have people that are like involved with the hedge fund world and places like that. Petroleum terminals was number 3. There's a lot of fossil fuel, unfortunately, on this list. Coal wholesalers, and then poultry wholesalers. 10 to 19 employees was kind of interesting. Reinsurance, followed by coal wholesalers, then auto manufacturing. And I was actually just on a call with the Chicago Inventors Association, and one woman was making something for electric cars, like a part. So it could be that you make components. And then a really hot category is B2B electronic markets. This is business to business e-commerce. One example from the book, Apurva Batra, he sells plastic bags that go inside of cereal boxes. He's a 29-year-old. He was an engineer at Chevron. He was looking for a business that would let him travel around the world. Brings in about $3 million a year, and he put it all online. So it's all automated. And he targets small and mid-size makers because the Kellogg's of the world already have their plastic bag supplier who's producing zillions of them. He could, it would be hard as a small business to serve a company that big unless you had a lot of financing. So he targeted the ones that really needed him. And I thought that's the brilliance of these folks. It's like he went to a trade show. He realized he couldn't compete to go for those big ones, but he didn't see that as a failure. He's like, okay, well, who needs these bags? And then he also branched out into pharmaceutical companies because a lot of pharma products come in a bag too. I hadn't noticed that, but they do. And that's a big area. And there are small pharma companies. Think about all the little venture-backed pharma companies out there. So it's like that probing and research. I hope this is a tool for people to, think about things that might be useful. But I didn't recommend that everybody just go down the list because some of these things are so niche that it would be hard to get into them. So my categories were e-commerce, the souped up service business, which is it's like a time for dollars business, but it has other things that bring in revenue. One example is Jenna Kutcher, who is a photographer. She does photography classes, and they're online. But her business is really as an Instagram influencer. She puts the photos up. She's got this cute young family, gets advertising revenue. So she rarely shoots a wedding now. She does make ongoing, recurring revenue from these online courses, but it's the Instagramming that is like the engine. Then manufacturing. There's one guy, Jeffrey Stern. He makes the little voice boxes in Build-A-Bear Workshop. Those little bears.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he makes $4 million a year in revenue. He's in his 60s. It's a great business. He's got 2 contractors. Financial services. There's a lot of people that worked in that industry at one point or the other, selling insurance or something. One fellow, he's an attorney who worked in that industry, Greg Pesci. He makes message pay, and basically, if banks want to bill you for something, they send it in your text messages. He hired a bunch of developers to create it. But he had relationships in banking, and it's very hard to get in the door if you don't. And there's all kinds of compliance things you need to know. So he leveraged what he learned in his jobs to be an entrepreneur. And then there's transportation. One woman she makes commissions by selling used private jets. And then home building is another one. But I think that's kind of interesting. Wade Heiner at Destiny Homes, he is a salesperson, and he partnered with 2 builders, and they make family style homes, but in a much lower price point. I think they were selling them for like $200,000, and it required them to go work with the municipalities and be allowed to put more houses on one lot. And then they got competition in that area. So they started going up in price point. So they found a differentiating factor where there was nobody at like the $280,000 range. And that's the kind of thing that I see with these entrepreneurs is, they're listening to the market, they're tweaking things, they're making sure that there's something special about how they do it. And it's really like an ongoing discipline, but that's where you have to like showing up for it, or you won't do those things.
I love it. I love all of it. And thank you so much for joining us and telling these amazing stories.
What a pleasure. It's so much fun. I love the questions you ask. I rarely have a question that nobody has asked me before, and you've been the one.
Fantastic. That's a great note to end on. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Elaine.